Selamat pagi, Mas Wat.
Halo, selamat pagi, Pak Darumes. Apa kabar, Pak?
Baik-baik.
Sehat ya, Pak?
Alhamdulillah sehat-sehat.
Sehat ya.
Tambah ramping, Mas Wat.
Iya, agak ikut diet juga.
Wah, mantap, mantap. Lebih ringan juga badan.
Iya, Pak Darumes. Pak Surya?
Ya.
I think Prof. Abernethy is already in here.
Oh, iya.
Maggie, Prof. Abernethy? I think she's already in the room now. We are going to start the event exactly at 9 o'clock. Okay, Pak Surya?
Yes, please.
Right, and you will be the moderator for this session. And we are very honored actually to have Prof. Abernethy to join in our accounting forum series. Hi, Maggie. Hi, Prof. Abernethy.
Hello.
Hello, how are you, Prof?
Morning. I'm good. How are you all?
Alhamdulillah, very good. You look very gorgeous today. Last time.
Oh, flattery will get you everywhere.
No, come on. Okay, last I saw you was about 8 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, in Kuala Lumpur, right, during IMAC. So there is not much of a difference 8 years ago and now. So you just look exactly the same.
Good to hear.
Right. So how's the situation?
That voice called sustainability.
Sorry, Pak Sur?
That voice called sustainability.
Right. That is called sustainability, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So how's the situation in Melbourne now, Prof?
Well, we're in lockdown.
Really?
Yeah, and so is New South Wales. So this Delta variant has been really contagious. Mind you, our numbers aren't anywhere close to what yours are.
Right.
But, you know, we've been very conservative. Now we're in a big push to get everyone immunized.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, there's been a bit of politics behind it all.
Yeah.
So are you still in lockdown, or are you able to do things?
We managed to do some things, but of course there are several restrictions. For instance, that there is no offline classes, so all the classes have to be conducted online. And but the situation is getting better nowadays. It's getting much better.
Oh, that's good. And have you got a fairly high immunization rate?
Currently no, but only in certain major cities. Yes, we do have a high rate of immunization, but in rural areas, in smaller cities, the vaccination rate is quite low. I think it's lower compared to the cities in Australia, I guess.
Yeah, although we were very slow to get this organized. Given that we're such a small country, you'd think that we would all be immunized by now, but yeah.
Right.
Anyway, you just have to live.
Hopefully, we expect to invite you, Prof, in our conference as part of our keynote speakers with Prof Understand, actually. But unfortunately, we have to postpone it.
It'll be nice to return to Indonesia. I love it there.
Right. Okay, Prof, can we start this session now?
Sure.
All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning. I hope you are all doing very well today, particularly in this difficult situation. And today, we are very honored and very pleased to have a very special guest, one that has provided numerous and significant contributions to the accounting literature. My colleagues were very happy to invite Prof. Margaret Abernethy from University of Melbourne. Actually, we plan to invite Prof. Abernethy as as our keynote speaker in our conference back in 2019, 1 or 2 months before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, that has to be postponed until we can get back to normal. Personally, I prefer to invite Prof. Abernethy to Semarang because there are many beautiful things this city and this province have to offer to you, Maggie. So I hope that we can do it very soon. I also invite the same thing to Prof. Van der Stad as well, because we plan to invite Prof. Abernethy and Prof. Van der Stad in Semarang. So hopefully next year in 2022 that we can do it. The dean that was planned to attend the session convey his apologies as he had urgent meetings with some mayors of the city in Central Java, and so he convey his apologies for that. And before we proceed with Prof. Abernethy's session, I would like to invite Prof. Faisal to give his opening remarks. Prof. Faisal is the director of Master of Accounting program, and he is currently secretary of Professor Potts in Universitas Diponegoro. Prof. Faisal, right, time is yours, Prof, to give some remarks to the audience and Prof. Maggie. Please, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fuad. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to all of you, especially our eminent speaker, Professor Abernethy. Good morning, Professor Abernethy.
Good afternoon, actually.
In Melbourne. In Melbourne. Almost 11, I think. Almost 11. Yeah. I really miss Melbourne. I last visited Melbourne in 2018. So I really miss Yarra River. I hope soon I will back to the Melbourne.
Yes.
Yeah. On behalf of Master of Accounting program, it is my pleasure to welcome all the participants today for Accounting Forum Series 2021, Master of Accounting program, Faculty of Economic and Business, Universitas Diponegoro. Expressly, I welcome to our eminent speaker, Professor Abernethy from University of Melbourne. Professor Abernethy has taken her time to share her experience and vast knowledge in the area management control systems. I hope this forum would amplify our knowledge and horizon in the area of management control system. Thank you and enjoy our forum. Back to Dr. Fuad. Thank you, Dr. Fuad.
Thank you. Pak Surya, Dr. Surya, as a moderator, you can start the session.
Okay,
Surya.
Thank you, Pak Fuad.
All right.
Hello, Maggie. I'm Surya.
Hello.
I'm going to conduct our discussion today. Ladies and gentlemen, actually, we are very, very, very honored. We know Maggie from her works, and now we can we can directly meet online with Maggie. And before we start our session, I would like to read her CV. I would like to show you her CV. Masofa, please show the CV, please. Professor Abernethy AM, Professor Abernethy holds several positions. Seems, yeah, thank you. She holds Sir Douglas Copeland Chair of Commerce, Chair of Managerial Accounting, and is Director of Melbourne Centre for Corporate Governance and Regulation, MCCGR. She is a leading researcher in cost accounting, and as previously mentioned by Prof. Faisal, she is an expert in management control system, corporate government, and already received more than 3 million in competitive research grants. Next slide, please. Her education in Bachelor of Economics with honors from Lathrop University, and then Doctor of Philosophy also from Lathrop University. She also holds position as editorial board in many notable journals, including Behavioral Research in Accounting, AAAG, AOS, and others. She also has so many publications in Accounting Review, Accounting Organization and Society, and other reputable journal. And there are some latest honors or awards. Yeah, in 2019, member of Order of Australia. So that's why we have. She has a title AM after her name. Yeah, and 2020, Faculty of Business and Economics Lifetime Award for exceptional distinction in research. 2018, Australian Accounting Hall of Fame, and 2012 Fellow of Australian Academy of Social Science. Well, today the title of our discussion is very intriguing. Actually, we are in Indonesia is familiar with Antonian Govinda Rajan. Back in 1965, Antony is considered as pioneer, yeah, with his seminal work, yeah, and some consider that this is the starting point for modern control system. And since the beginning, actually, Antony stated that management control system, the basis for work in management control should be behavioral science. However, today, even though in accounting itself, yeah, when the accounting scholar adopted social science, we already know that informal setting, informal control is play important role in business. However, in my opinion, it seems still lack in the area of informal control. That's why I say previously that the title is very intriguing, because it is informal control system. How can informal control become a system? What theory relating to this, and how is the research avenue? If you have as many questions as mine, then we should be grateful, because we have the expert today, Professor Abernethy. Professor, we have approximately 19 minutes, yeah, for first an hour. This is the time for presentation, and the second session will be discussion and answer. And for the audience, if during presentation you have any questions, please feel free to write down on our chat box here. And if you want to directly ask Professor Abernethy, I give you after. Please welcome Professor Abernethy. And Professor Abernethy, time is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm disappointed that I can't be there in person. Now, if you want to ask a question during the presentation, I think if someone can just watch for the hand, it's often better to ask during the presentation, but I'm happy either way. So I will try to share my screen with you. If I'm going too quickly, also, please just sing out. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see clearly, Professor.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, I'll start. And as I said, I'm delighted to be here. So thank you very much. I guess the word that was a bit misleading was informal management system, because it is difficult to call this a system. It's more informal, and it's the practices. And why I have chosen this is that I have studied formal control systems for nearly 30 years. And I've observed that they often don't work. So my questions and my students' questions and my colleagues' questions that I've ones that I've worked with, why do we observe formal systems still in place? I mean, we know that management will manipulate performance measurement systems. We know that they will, resist bureaucratic practices like supervision or standard operating procedures. They just don't always work. And so what we're asking, is it possible that some of these formal controls are actually used informally? And then I want to study some examples of how these informal controls can be used to get people to do the right things. So I'm going to share with you 3 studies. I could have just presented one paper and given you lots of statistics and lots of details, but I really just want to share with you the research problem that we're trying to study and how we've gone about studying it. And I chose to do that in Indonesia because I think you might be able to use some of your good contacts in industry to study similar types of questions. So we use 3 different industries. We use, pardon me? Was there a question or?
No, I think unintentionally turn on the mic, Professor. You may go on.
Oh, okay. So one of the studies uses physicians in clinical units who are managers of those clinical units, and it's in a single large hospital. And that's been published in Management Science. I also did with another PhD student a study in schools, the school sector in Australia, and that's currently under review. And then another study of department heads in a large manufacturing firm with a PhD student, and that's been published in TAR. I can give you the references to these if you like. So they're from 3 different industries. They required good access to these organizations. So my research interests of late, and it's kind of why I got into corporate governance, is because we know that formal controls, performance measurement systems seldom work as intended. And it's the case across many types of firms. And one of the key arguments, which I actually studied in my PhD study, is that formal controls are often incomplete in most work environments, especially work environments that require multitasking, that are complex, that there's ambiguity in decision-making. This makes it increasingly difficult to prescribe behavior or measure output. You can't. If there's a lot of exceptions and there's a lot of uncertainty, you can't write a standard operating procedure. And in many firms, it's difficult to measure output in the short term. Think of teaching. We can only measure whether our students are successful in the long term. And of course, we have much evidence of the adverse consequences. So the research that I'm going to share with you is that they all share something similar in that we're trying to solve a puzzle that we observed. We still observe these formal controls, and we ask, well, why do they still exist if we know that they have so many unintended consequences? Are they be using informally for other purposes? We also want to know how these informal controls work and if they interact with formal controls. So the control problem, that we've been studying as management accounting researchers is how to encourage cooperation and collaboration among individuals so that organizational goals are achieved. Now, there's a really good article by Gibbons and Bob Kaplan from the Balanced Scorecard fame, and it's in the American Economic Review. It's only a few pages to read, but they actually model informal roles of performance measurement systems, and they use it in the context of the Balanced Scorecard. And what they argue quite convincingly is that these formal controls are used informally. Have a look at that. It's what sparked our idea. They link the Balanced Scorecard to relational contracting, and I'm going to talk about relational contracting shortly and define what I mean by it. So the first control puzzle is with my colleague and former PhD, Chung-Yu Hung. And of course, an old colleague that I've worked with for, 25 years, Lawrence van Lent from the Netherlands, who's now in Germany. So Chung-Yu identified a large Chinese hospital, and we use this thing, and we have good data about the physicians who are managers of clinical units. Now, what we observed when we looked at the data, because this is all archival data, much of my work previously has been in survey, but we looked at the bonus system and we found that physician managers differ in how they allocate the bonus. Now, the bonus, they have enough autonomy that they can decide how much of the bonus they get to keep within guidelines, and then how much they distribute to the subordinates. It's not highly formalized how the bonus system works. Now, what we observe is that some physicians keep more of the bonus pool for themselves, and then they distribute the rest more evenly. Other physician managers take as much as they can, and they allocate the bonus system not evenly, but based on, well, we're not quite sure what criteria, but it's not as even as the other physician managers. Now, those physician managers that share more of the bonus pool and do it evenly across their subordinates have better outcomes. So this is really an interesting puzzle. So this is just an example. I should have been able to try to find some Chinese faces, but I ran out of time. So we really want to understand, what underlies the physician manager's discretionary bonus decisions. What's driving this behavior? Well, another good paper that's in the management literature by Bloom and Van Reenen asks a similar question. What they do is they document management practices in similar organizations and the effectiveness of those practices. And they ask, why don't firms or managers within firms simply mimic the practices that appear to be effective? It's not difficult to mimic formal practices. So that person's got a balanced scorecard, I can put a balanced scorecard in here. But only some leaders seem to do so effectively. And so is it the informal management practices that are difficult to mimic, we ask? Or are some leaders better able to develop relational contracts that work effectively? Now, relational contracts are very well suited in hospitals and in other organizations where behavior can't be specified ex ante. So you can't easily use formal contracts. So relational contracts are defined quite broadly as informal agreements that cannot be specified ex ante or verified ex post. They are extremely difficult to build and maintain. Gibbons and Henderson, I think it was in organizational science, have got a really good paper where they actually give examples of relational contracts. We don't know much about relational contracts, but most organizations have relational contracts. Your own institution has relational contracts, I would hypothesize. But it requires two principles to be met. First, the leader has to be able to ensure that there is clarity as to what actions are desirable. And credibility is, does the manager keep his promise? Do they do what they say they will do? The credibility challenge. So they can be used, relational contracts, when relations among leaders and employees cannot be formalized in a specified formal contract. So when you can't specify desired behaviors ex ante, when you can't specify undesirable behaviors, where you can't specify the contingencies because they're unknown, and also the associated rewards and punishment. So like other management controls, relational contracts are designed to encourage coordination and collaboration among employees. Managers with different levels of expertise, we argue, vary in their ability to establish long-term cooperation. So we assess if formal controls can play an informal management role to achieve cooperation among employees. So you have to think about what a relational contract would look like. Think about the two principles. Now, here's an example that was in that Gibbons and Henderson paper. And it's a picture of the production line at Toyota. They have what is called an andon cord, that cord that's hanging up there. And workers are supposed to pull the andon cord if there is a serious problem. It stops production entirely. Now, obviously that is costly, and you can't specify ex ante when the worker should pull the andon cord. So employees need clarity when to pull the cord. This is a relational contract at work. So managers, through their examples, through experience, have to establish that clarity. And then they have to establish their credibility, that they won't punish the workers for pulling the andon cord. So employees must have clarity on when to pull the andon cord. Now, other firms can't mimic that. It's very difficult to mimic. And of course, the superior must do as they say they will do. I like this cartoon. I wish he'd stop asking me about his credibility rating. I hate lying to him. So a manager has to be able to, do what she says she will do. I relate this to when I was dean of the faculty. That credibility is so critical for a leader. And so is clarity in terms of what's important. So we have this large private hospital in China, and we have data over a 4-year period, multiple departments with physicians as head of departments. Bonus allocations are done monthly, so we have a large sample. And it's a really useful setting because we know from the healthcare literature, which I've studied over many years, cooperation is a major determinant of clinical effectiveness. So establishing that cooperation is critical. Managers also have significant authority, including how bonus pool is allocated. The size of the bonus pool depends on the department's contribution to hospital profits. Interestingly, they decide on their own bonus. Now, that might not be common across many organizations, but it's very common. It's like being the residual claimant. So I think it has applicability outside of just this organization. And the bonus is large relative to salary, so it really matters how this is done. Now, Chung Yu had access to personnel records, the size of the bonus allocated, and the performance of clinical units. And we had a reasonably good measure of expertise of the physician manager, which we argue is what's important here. High expert managers are more able than low expert managers at inducing cooperation. So if I'm a good researcher and I'm trying to get my colleagues to do research, I have got a considerable expertise that my subordinates will trust me that what I say to do would enable them to also have better research production. So expert managers understand the importance and they use the bonus allocation decision. This is what we think as an informal management practice to promote cooperation. They're able to create a cooperative working environment where each member cooperates with others to achieve long-term mutual benefit. And because the performance of those clinical units improve, in the next period, they benefit because they get a larger share of the bonus pool. Now, low expert managers don't have domain expertise, don't have the same level of domain expertise. By that, I mean domain expertise in clinical work. So they don't have the personal influence to overcome the credibility and clarity challenges to create relational contracts in the first place. So we find that this is the case. High expert physician managers keep less of the bonus pool for themselves, and they allocate the bonus pool more evenly. Now, allocating the bonus pool more evenly encourages the subordinates to cooperate. They're not in competition. If it was based on their own importance or their own contribution, then indeed you will not have cooperation. So high expertise managers make these decisions. They also have better performance. We think that what we observed can be explained by looking at relational contracting. Please let me know if you want the reference to that. I really like this paper. Okay, another control problem. Now this one still hasn't been published, but we're getting there. So it's under review now. Now this, my PhD student is actually Sujay Nair. I think he's originally from Thailand or Indonesia, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, we did this study in the education department in Victoria, Australia. And we had really good support from the education department in that they gave us names of principals in primary and secondary schools. We also were able to conduct a survey. And we find, and again, you kind of find this out with your data, is that some principals are more lenient in the giving out of rewards than others. Now, why would that be so? What explains that? Schools are really good setting as performance-based incentive contracts are virtually absent. There's a real resistance by teachers, by society, to try to measure teachers' performance based on formal measures. However, principals still have in our setting responsibility for performance management. They undertake performance appraisals and also reward teachers. They can reward teachers to some extent who are performing well. They tend to use non-financial rewards like praise and, written up as the best teacher of the month or something like that. So it's not got financial rewards, but there are non-financial rewards in place for some principals. And I think this, when we were doing this study, I thought this is just like the university sector. We have very ambiguous goals. One of our performance criteria is progress towards achieving average teaching on a particular question or evidence of participation in development of curriculum. There's considerable ambiguity in such a contract, and it's really difficult to take any actions because an individual may have lots of reasons why the quality of teaching score is lower than 3.5. Same with curriculum development. What do we mean by that? More online, more engaging, more practice-oriented. So I'm sure you would have many examples yourself. Okay, so the control problem for principals is that formal controls won't work well. Too many exceptions. Work is too complex. Cannot prescribe behavior ex ante or measure accurately the desired outcomes. I wrote a good paper, a review paper with Dennis Campbell that got published in the Journal of Accounting Research that talked about the use of informal controls. You might want to refer to it. And this is a key issue with formal controls, is that they just simply don't capture behavior that's desirable. But the principal of the school still needs to provide direction for teachers. They need to establish performance expectations. And they need to performance manage teachers when they're not performing well and take actions when things don't go according to plan. So we predict that relational contracts will be important in this context. And we expect that we observed, to be frank, to be completely honest, we observed that relational contracts were important, more important for principals who were new to a school. So again, we didn't start off thinking this was a relational contracting study, but a way to explain what we observed in our data was to think about, well, maybe there's a relational contract happening here. So here's a new principal. Welcome aboard. I think you're going to provide the direction we've been missing. So that's a sheep, right? I don't know how many sheep you have in Indonesia, but we have lots of sheep. And sheep generally follow. I wish academics followed, at least when I was head of department. They typically don't follow. Okay, so leniency is a common tendency among leaders. That was documented long ago. But our understanding of why such a bias arises is limited. Now, leniency can be in rewarding an individual more than what the performance would actually indicate. Now, research in accounting has typically described leniency as having a negative consequence. Now, Jasmine Bowl actually said one of the positive benefits of over-rewarding is that there is this increased perception of fairness, which leads to higher trust. So we kind of picked up on some of these ideas, although she didn't really study why that would be the case or under what circumstance that would be the case. But you know, individuals, the psychology literature tells us that we all think we are better than we really are. So we often exaggerate our own performance in our own mind. And then when our superior doesn't indicate that they appreciate that to the same extent, we think it's unfair and we can't trust them. So again, the puzzle that we're trying to solve is, why do we find differences in principals' use of leniency when rewarding teachers? Well, again, we come back to these two core principles, clarity and credibility. For relational contracts to work, the leader has to ensure that employees develop an understanding of the implicit contracts of their employment. There, you know, in a teaching situation, there are many implicit terms of what is desired. They have to know what the rewards and punishments are that accompany such behavior. And credibility, as I've said before, ensure employees believe the leader will do as she says she will do. So if I say that you're not going to be punished if you pull the Anden cord, I don't punish you, even though it's been costly for the firm. Okay, how can leniency in rewards serve as a relational contract? Well, because it increases clarity. If rewards are given out more often, so not just when someone is a high performer, the information about what is important occurs more frequently. Okay? So being lenient can communicate to employees and coworkers the desired behavior and the payoffs associated with such behavior. If you only give out a reward when you meet a particular performance target, then you're unlikely to do it as often. It could increase the credibility of the leader, may be needed to reward actions that have long-term payoffs, but could be negative in the short term. And again, this tendency of people to overestimate their performance, lenient rewards ensures that those who feel they deserve a reward are indeed rewarded. However, there can be a downside to leniency, which I'll talk about in a moment. Principals who are new to the school need to develop relational contracts with their teachers. If you've been at the school for a significant period of time, then it's likely the teachers already know what's important. But if you're new to the school, you have to establish quite early on your performance expectations. So we expect this particular group, they're experienced principals but are new to the school, will be more lenient. However, because of prior literature, we know that leniency and rewards can be costly. So individuals might think that the performance expectations are lower, and thus over time, and thus do not perform better. It might actually even diminish the clarity of what's important. If you're rewarding excessively, then it's not really a signal that this is what we should be doing. So we test whether the relation is nonlinear, which was a good pickup from someone. So the curve is not linear. At some point in time, if you're overly lenient, the costs are too high. Okay, so we had really good sources of data, and we surveyed principals after we had gone and interviewed a number of principals to test whether our survey was capturing their management practices. And we directly measure from them leniency in the use of financial and non-financial rewards. But importantly, because surveys can often be criticized as not having good construct validity. So we also use a survey of teachers the Department of Education conducted. And we use the data from that, as there are some good proxies for clarity and credibility. So we don't use data from the same respondent for our analysis. We're testing to see whether some principles will have better clarity and credibility than other principles. And we link that to leniency. We also have a good archival database of the school. So the size, the socioeconomic status, how students are performing based on standardized testing. So we have 3 sources of data, which has helped us overcome much of the criticism of survey-based work. You have to be very careful these days using surveys so that you demonstrate construct validity. Okay, and our findings: experienced principals who are new to the school use non-financial rewards more leniently than other principals. We captured financial rewards, but so few schools use them that we didn't include it in the paper in the end. And there is an inverted U-shaped relationship. Too much leniency is not a good thing. So education is a large and significant in the economy. It's an important sector. Principals are key leaders, and we know that they influence learning outcomes. But we know very little about management practice. So we think this enables us to generalize to other settings. You know, you could do it in a university. You could do it in schools in, you know, you could kind of think about it in schools in Indonesia. So we think that there will be other work that follows from this. Okay. The last study is one by a PhD student, Rudy Shang, and Chung Yu Hung was at the time in the department, and she co-supervised Rudy. And we got it published in the Accounting Review. And again, this isn't about a particular informal control, but it's about, well, it is about an informal control, really. And I'll get to that. And here's a cartoon. Does anyone know where we keep the unwritten rules? So the way this study developed was, again, it was a puzzle. And Rudy had very good access to a large manufacturing plant in China. The work performed was routine. Performance was measured objectively. But senior management were still concerned about the performance of their workers because employees couldn't be fired and most had been in the same position for many years. So it was a setting where we had some of the context controlled. Now, what we wanted to look at was we wanted to use identity economics, which Cranton and Akerhoff won a Nobel Prize, not for his work on group identity, but it's a fairly powerful theory about how group identity can influence behavior informally. So we wanted to understand the impact of work group identity. Is this how informal rules are developed? And I'll go through and explain that. So while on site, and when looking at the data, we discovered that the performance information environment differed across the work groups. So workers all worked in small groups. And the performance information environment is kind of like relative performance evaluation. It differed. And we linked that to group identity. Now, the group identity or organizational identity, sense of self comes from group membership. You think yourself, we like to be in the in-group and not in the out-group, right? So there's a long history of research on identity. And it works because there can be interest alignment. So if I've got strong organizational identity, I want to do everything I can that's in the organization's best interest. It also encourages norm adoption. So if everyone in my group is behaving like this, I don't want to be different. So what we're looking at is why group identity will influence how people behave. So there's two mechanisms with group identity. There's the interest alignment. So based on identity economics, employees with high work group identity will see themselves as part of the work group and derive utility by working hard on their tasks. I kind of think of organizational identity how I feel with the University of Melbourne. I would not want to do anything that would be adverse to the university. Conformity, of course, can be a downside because you can be affected by others in the work group. So you want to conform. You don't want to stand out or do anything different. So there's a kind of two mechanisms at work here. And we wanted to unravel to see how these mechanisms work. And mainly because we found some surprising results. So we know from prior literature that performance reporting format matters to how individuals respond. So we assess if this performance environment, this is the way performance is reported to individuals within each work group, influence the relation between group identity and performance. And are the different mechanisms at work? We expect that in a low performance reporting transparency, so this is where employees see their own performance, the self-interest alignment will dominate. Okay, but if there's high transparency, it's possible a conformity mechanism will dominate. So just think that if I'm kind of not conforming to what others in my group are doing, then I might actually change my behavior. So we have an interesting SOE. It's a petrol and chemical organization located in northern China. And we had really good access. And the tasks that are performed are very routine: equipment inspection, operation, and maintenance. And you can measure all of that. The paper's in the accounting review if you want to have a look at it, or I can send you a copy. But what's interesting when we get into the organization, and this is where I think actually studying at the organization level is quite helpful, is that we find variations in reporting transparency. Some managers of the work group have private reporting. They tear off this strip and give it to each individual in the work group. That's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, the manager will publish a performance table that has everybody. So Fuad, Abernethy, you know, they're all listed. And so I know exactly how you're performing. And it's posted up for everybody. And the manager of the work group gets to choose. So the other good things about this research site is that employees have been in the same group for years. They work in the same shift and they engage in various activities. So they've been in the same town, working in the same shift. This would be salient for identifying group identity. And indeed it is. So we do a survey of work group identity. 50% have high work group identity, 40% moderate, and 10% low. We have enough variation, but it's obviously salient. And there's a very comprehensive performance measurement. I was really surprised at the detail of how performance is measured on a monthly basis. And there's also low turnover, few promotion incentives, and career concerns. So employees typically can't get fired. But there isn't much upside either. So our results, we find that the performance reporting environment is important in explaining the association between work group identity and employee performance. So in other words, group identity doesn't always result in better performance. When you have a particular reporting environment, if it's low transparency and you only see your own, the interest alignment appears to dominate. So work group identity, I actually spelled that wrong, is positively associated with employee performance. But under high transparency, we find a negative result. This was a real puzzle. In other words, if everybody knows how everybody else is performing, work group identity and performance is negative. This was a puzzle. Okay, so we ask ourselves, are we seeing conformity behavior? Is it that the high performers are conforming to the norms by reducing their own performance? So if the average performance is 8 and I'm performing at a 10, do I think, oh, you know, I'm not going to be part of the group anymore. I'm going to scale back my performance. So we split the sample into high performers and low performers. And indeed, we find that's the case. Public reporting of performance has a negative consequence on high performers. They actually conform by lowering their performance. And that's why we find that negative result when we look at the sample overall. So how do we contribute? Well, we don't know very much of how group identity works. I have had a paper published with it, but we highlight that work group identity may have a negative impact. So you'd have to watch out for that if you were a manager thinking about the reporting format. We contribute to the research on internal performance reporting. So managers' reporting choices play a significant role on the identity performance relationship. High reporting transparency may have a downside. And as I said, the practical implications is that managers may want to think about how they develop their performance reporting. Okay, so what can you learn from this? Well, I actually think understanding how a sector or one organization works, you get a really good understanding by talking to senior managers in the field. We had a really good understanding of our schools because we talked to principals and we thought about what the issues were. If you have that good contact with an organization or an industry, you get good access to data because managers trust you. And so you can test theories using a relatively large sample, particularly those that rely on soft controls or informal management practices. So it helps us understand in the real sense how context matters to the design and use of formal controls. Now, is it risky? Well, in my view, it's no more risky than using public archival data or using poorly designed surveys. With archival data, it's very difficult to find something novel. Those databases have been mined for all of the good ideas. It's also challenging to figure out when you do adopt this research strategy that I've described. It's very difficult sometimes to figure out what we observe. So the three of us would sit there with the data, in some cases with the interviews, to try to figure out what it was we were observing. You do need a very broad knowledge of theory, of psychology, of economics. And it's also quite challenging to negotiate access. It took us a long time to develop the study in education. We had to talk to the department. We had to talk to this manager. That manager left, and so we'd have to talk to another bureaucrat. What will journal editors say? Well, some of the comments that we get, what can we learn from one organization, although we don't tend to get that as much. And are your proxies of the variables of interest valid? And I think we've worked very hard at doing that. Same questions get asked of archival or survey data. But to me, we learn a lot. It makes research fun. It's fun to solve the problem. Why do we observe what we observe? It helps to test theory, and it helps to build theory. So I look forward to hearing your comments. I took a little bit longer than I said. Oh no, we're about the right time.
Yes, it's all right. Thank you, Professor Abernethy. It's very interesting. Yeah, Professor Abernethy called the puzzle as a puzzle of control. Yeah. It might be, it is the answer for how formal control doesn't work. Yeah, and there are three industries, three sectors. First from manufacturing, the Toyota and then Cord, and then in education, where there is a particular behavior that's called as a Leniency. Yeah, leniency.
Yeah, leniency.
It's kind of a tolerant, yeah, for the performance, giving more tolerant for the performance. And the last one, as just mentioned, in China, yeah, where the group identity is a play for the informal control. So this is various data, various across the industry, and it seems that we have to do using little by little to solve the puzzle. All right, there are 167 audience here. If you want to,
oh my goodness,
please and raise your virtual hand. And what we got in our chat box, oh, there are some. First from Professor Faisal. Yeah, Professor Faisal, would you mind asking directly? Professor Faisal? The mic is still mute, Professor. Please turn it on.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Maggie, for a very inspired presentation. But because I am very interested with the sustainability reporting. Now I have some question about the how to integrate a management control system with sustainability reporting. As we know that currently there are some researchers try to offer the conceptual. For example, Villiers, Hartman, and then Ganter try to link the management control system and sustainability reporting, and they said the terminology is environmental management control system. My question is, in your based on your experience, is it possible based on theoretical to link the sustainability reporting with the management control system? Thank you, Professor Maggie.
I don't see why not. I mean, sustainability reporting has to draw on the organization's information system. So to me, once you start to capture data that measures sustainability, you've got some measures there. And you can use those measures in formal contracts. You could also study whether, you know, whether there are some subtle communication signals that happen as a result of a firm going down this sustainability path, which in a way is trying to increase the clarity to employees as to what's important. Because sustainability, I imagine, is one of those areas where it would be very easy to manipulate the numbers because they're not as hard as other measures. But there would be long-term consequences where a firm is doing that. So really what you're trying to do is change the mindset of employees who are in a position to influence sustainable actions. So yeah, I definitely think it's part of the management information system.
Okay, in terms of the data source, any suggestion, Prof. Maggie? Because usually in sustainability reporting, we always use like index. But in management control system, I have not any idea about the, especially for the secondary data. Any suggestion?
I'd have to give that some thought. So are these indexes those that are used across industries? I would think that organizations, if they want to improve performance, would start to measure things a little bit upstream, you know, to measure some of the actions that are necessary to improve on those indices. But you'd actually have to get into an organization. That would be the first step. Get into an organization and find out what they're doing. You know, find in the indice, in the index, who's improved in the last couple of years. And then see if you can go and see them if there is such a, you know, an organization in Indonesia. You might be able to try to explore what they're doing to improve. They might just be, they might not be doing anything. They might be trying to manipulate the index.
Yep. Yeah.
And we know that's the case with many types of regulation.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Right, move to next question. Pak Fuad already raised his hand, but I'm going to give this opportunity for Pak Ertambang. Pak Ertambang. Pak Ertambang, do you mind asking directly? Yes, please, Pak Ertambang. Turn on the mic, please. Oh, all right, all right. Yes, seems there is a problem in the sound or voice. I'm going to read the question from Pak Etambang. While leniency seems to be one of the most effective way to deal with employee incentive and performance, it may introduce serious problem relating to procedural fairness within organization. Would you comment on this, please, Professor?
Well, yes. And it's for that reason that we didn't expect leniency in rewards to be strictly linear. Too much leniency will camouflage what's important in terms of the performance measures, and it would actually increase the perceptions of fairness. So up to a point, it can be valuable, but you don't want to confuse the signal. So if everyone is getting rewarded leniently, then I don't think the manager's credibility will be that high. In other words, they'll think this manager doesn't know how to differentiate between really good performance and poor performance. So yeah, I think the relationship is nonlinear. After a particular point in time, it declines.
Okay, yeah. Previously, Professor Abernethy mentioned the U shape, yeah, before the relation, I think. All right. Next is Pak Fuad.
All right. Thank you very much, Pak Surya. I think I also have the almost similar question with Pak Ertambang, particularly regarding the informal control practices, Prof. This is very interesting, and my question is straightforwardly simple, and I think that based on your presentation, and I agree totally with the works. Do you think that the informal control practices are likely to be very contextual, Prof. Abernethy? For instance, let's say the bonus allocation that is distributed more evenly to their subordinates may be effective in one organization, but may not be effective in another, or in one particular culture, but may not be as effective when being implemented in another culture. And how do you see this contextual issue? Can you generalize this finding in all, let's say, in most cultures or most organizational situation? So that would be the first question. And secondly, regarding the, you also mentioned that the reviewers for one of your papers indicates that there may be some issues regarding the measurements, particularly on your informal control practices. So how did you handle this situation? So this is very interesting because when the informal control practices are likely to be contextual, and then you are going to make a universal or generalized, standardized measurement for informal control practices, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. Abernethy.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me look at the context first. It is possible that, let's say, issues around leniency will be organizational dependent and manager dependent. But what that's likely to influence is the variability in your scale, for example. So it could be that in some cultures, leniency is much higher than in other cultures. But as long as you have variability in your scale, it shouldn't matter. It's just that if you kind of think of your scale as, let's say, 1 to 20 on a number of items, it could be that in our education sector that leniency is on the lower end, but you still have variability. You just don't have the full scale used. And in another setting, it's on the higher end of the scale. But as long as you've got variability, you should still test the theory. You should still be able to test the relationship. So is the relationship between leniency and credibility and clarity is the theory not applicable in different cultures? I can't think of a reason why it wouldn't be. I think in the measurement, you may find variability. And we know that there are cultural variables in some cultures that will influence the extent to which leniency would be on the high side or the low side. But as long as there's variability, you should still be able to test your relationship.
I see.
Now, the measurement issue, you know, I get very frustrated with reviewers and editors that talk about measurement, you know, and I've experienced it with survey work. And now I'm extremely careful to make sure that if I'm measuring a variable X, that I also measure other variables that I know will be related to it and that I can correlate with to demonstrate construct validity. Now, you think of archival work, you know, I remember when I was first studying where size was used as a proxy for political costs. You know, is there really a connection there? If you actually look at some of the archival data that's used as proxies, they are so far away from being a valid measure of what you're interested in measuring. But anyway, I've had to kind of just, you know, deal with that. So the measurement, we just have to get a lot of support to say that that's a good proxy. So we use teachers' assessment of clarity and credibility for the education study. And we have a lot of references that support that, the way that we've used it, that I think are quite convincing. It's not pure. And remember, we didn't want to measure all of the variability, all the variables from one respondent, because then you have response bias.
I see.
You know,
I see, yeah.
you get that a lot. So at least this way, we've got different sources of data.
I see.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
yep,
yeah,
yep.
measurement you've got to pay a lot of attention to.
Right. I've been there. Too. Thank you very much, Prof. Aberetti.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for any inconvenience. Previously, your mic is muted. Yeah, so we already open it. And if you want to participate, you want to ask, please feel free. It doesn't matter in Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa Inggris. That will be fine. All right.
Can I have questions?
Yes, please.
Pak Surya.
Ya, Assalamualaikum. Ya.
Can I have questions?
Yes, please.
Ya.
Okay. Thank you.
Satu orang. Iya. Gimana?
Pak Unggul.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Pak Surya, for your opportunities. Good afternoon, Professor Aberetti.
Afternoon.
Pleased to have you in this event. I'm very pleased to have you in these conversations about management control systems, and what a nice insight and also a lesson from your studies. Basically, your presentation remind me to my PhD dissertation, Professor. Because I did my PhD in Adelaide in University of South Australia, and also I was interested to study about the informal control systems in multinational companies. So basically, when I did my PhD, it was inspired by two articles in Accounting Organization and Society. The first article written by Professor Hartman and Slepniker in 2009 about the formality and informality of performance evaluations. And then the second article, it is written by Professor Trevor Hopper from Manchester Business School and also Sujoko Efrin in 2005, if I'm mistaken, in AOS. It is regarding the management control systems and management control system and ethnicity in Chinese-owned companies in Indonesia. So those papers actually inspired me to write the paper or write the dissertations about how to deal with informality of performance evaluations to influence could influence the interpersonal trust, the trust between subordinates and supervisors in multinational companies. So according to my studies, I found that basically most of your studies also, it's relevant to my findings or my results, because when I did my thesis in with mixed method analysis, I did the quantitative and qualitative, and according to the qualitative result, I found that basically for most of Indonesians employees, they are more preferable to use the formal control system or formal performance evaluations due to transparency, due to objective performance control system compared to informal one. But I also found an interesting result when it is dealing with the informal one, because when there are too many informal control system or informal performance evaluation in Indonesia. What you have mentioned about work group identity is clearly can be seen in an Indonesian context. So that's why what Pak Fuad has been said about the influence of culture, it is really happen in Indonesian context. So that's why I'm interested to find in terms of informality or non-formal performance evaluation. I also found that basically it still have a positive relationship to the interpersonal trust, but again, the employees would like to reconfirm. So reconfirm to the, to the kind of the values of transparency, the values of objectivities, the values of communicative performance systems, and so forth. So based on based on my studies, I can conclude that basically when we implement the informal performance evaluations in Indonesian context, in multinational companies in Indonesia, the employees, they are more prefer to use the formal control system due to transparency and more objective indicators rather than informal one. But when they are pushed to use informal one, they still have to, they still need to evaluate. They still need to evaluate whether this informal one, such as personal approach or personal contact, they still need to evaluate as long as this informal control system or informal performance evaluation could foster the transparency and could foster the objectivity of the performance evaluation, that it is still acceptable for many employees or many subordinates or local employees. So
to the point,
opinion, I need your opinion about this one, Professor. So my study is about the cross-cultural context, cross-cultural psychology, as Pak Fuad has been said. So What's your opinion about this one, about the many contextual factors or many influential factors that need to be considered by organization when they are implement or when they are adopt the informal performance evaluation or informal control system in their organizations? So I need your comment on this, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment, but again, and if you're studying multiple firms or multiple units within firms that have different cultures, then it's kind of hard to identify what exactly is going on. Did you find that some are performing better? Did you have any objective measures of performance? For example, those who used informal controls as well as formal controls, did they perform better than those who just relied on formal controls?
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't measure about that one, Professor. When I select the multinational companies, I selected to opposite culture, very extreme culture in terms of theories of Hofstede. For instance, I choose multinational companies based on the Western companies such as US and Europe, and then I choose Indonesians as an opposite culture of their culture. So when I look at most of the mechanistic control system or most of the formal control system, basically it is still acceptable by many Indonesians as regarding to the more transparent and more objective way of the formal control systems. But on the other hand, Indonesian employees or Indonesian subordinates also do not ignore the existing of the informal control system, but they need to reconfirm whether this informal control system, as long as this can be relevant to their interests or relevant to the objective and transparent and give them advantage, so it is still acceptable. So that is my case. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of questions that you could study further with that, but yeah, I think if you've got rich descriptive data, then that's in itself very interesting, because I think there is a tendency for individuals to latch on to something formal, particularly if they have to justify it to a multinational corporation. So that could be explaining that relationship, and also the relationship of the Indonesian company to the head office. So yeah, it's difficult for me to actually, but yeah, I think what you've identified here is not uncommon, but it would be good to then understand what are the consequences of that.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Badenti.
Oh, pleasure.
For your facilities. Thank you.
All right, we have other questions, actually 3 questions here. I invite Wani. Wani, do you mind join us? Or if not, I'm going to read your questions. Yeah. The first question is, can informal online? Hello. Okay. Can informal control stand alone without formal control? And the second is a bit long. I think it's better, Professor Abernethy, to this question. Can informal control stand alone without formal control?
Well, only in very small organizations. In large organizations, you'll always find formal controls. It's like a comfort blanket. So, you know, in the organizations that we study, they still had formal controls in place. Yeah. It's a reliance on them vis-a-vis other informal controls.
Can we say
In small organizations, you can have the manager walking around. So it's possible.
Okay. All right. Next question is, can you more explain why you said formal control isn't work, while we know formal control as so necessary to the company? For example, standard operating procedure, job description, budgeting, and etc. Why it is more important than formal control? Why formal control doesn't work? And Bu Ani asking why informal control is more important than formal.
Well, formal controls will work if you can pre-specify desired behavior, right? If I can program behavior, like on a production line, you'll do this, then you'll do this, then you'll do that. That's a formal control. It's a standard operating procedure. If I can use a formal performance measure that captures what I want it to capture in terms of what the organization's trying to achieve, and if it fully captures it, so number of units sold, number of production units made, then those formal controls can work. It's when they're inadequate, when they're incomplete measures of performance, and they lead to undesirable behavior. In other words, you get what you measure. So if someone says 5 publications as a performance measure for me without any quality target, then I can get 5 publications. But that's not really what the organization wants if it wants to be a leading research-intensive university. So you have to have a measure that captures that. And that's very difficult. I mean, I know because of my relational contract with the university that they want high quality publications, and I can't do that every year. I mean, sometimes I'm lucky and I get 3, sometimes I have to wait for 2 years. And most of the time a publication takes about 5 years, if you're lucky. So, you know, you have to build that in and communicate that for people to have clarity on what's important. And that's quite hard to do. It's much easier to say 5 publications, and I'll tick that off every year.
Pak Surya, unfortunately, Prof. Abernethy is about to have another meeting. Right, Prof?
I'm Zooming all day.
Right, actually, we still have many questions, and Prof. Abernethy informed me yesterday that she only had 90 minutes. So is that correct, Prof?
Yes,
can we, okay, Pak Surya, perhaps one last question, because I'm afraid that...
and if you want to send me your questions, I'm sure Fuad is happy to give you my email address, and I will answer them the best I can.
Okay, Prof. I will send the questions to your email, Prof.
Okay.
Okay. Pak Surya, please, Pak Surya.
One last question. I think it is relevant to my question as well. Yeah, previously MJS based on contingency theory, and it is relevant that previously Prof. Abernethy mentioned a broad knowledge of theory. So the question is, how is informal control research in the future, and what is the theory relevant to that informal control?
Well, I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions. For example, subjectivity in performance measures. A colleague of mine, Ann Lillis, has written a really good paper. It's coming out in the review that is a qualitative study. So I think there is a lot of potential for more work because, look, there's not much more we can study about formal performance measures. Maybe there is. Maybe some of you have got some good ideas. But, you know, the literature has looked at performance measures, the context, the variables that influence it. You know, understanding packages of controls are important, and we don't know much about that. So yeah, I think there are many research opportunities.
Right.
And you kind of find these research opportunities by getting involved in an organization and finding out what their problems are. See, I think culture, the culture within the firm has a lot to explain what's happening. And again, we don't know a lot about culture and the impact that has on the design of the performance measurement system or the control system generally.
One last question, Professor. Do you still support that the management control system is a package?
Is what?
Is a package. Do you still support the notions that management control system is a package?
Is a package,
Action control,
absolutely.
result control, yeah, informal control.
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't just isolate one particular dimension. They work as a package.
Okay, I agree with it. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think the puzzle remains out there, waiting for us for research. And thank you very much, Professor. Have a nice day. And back to Pak Fuad.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Prof. Unfortunately, this is we are 2 minutes late, Prof. But thank you very much for your presentation. Hopefully that we are going to have this event in offline mode next year, hopefully. Inshallah with you and Prof. Van der Stad. Hello, Prof.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
you so much
Prof.
for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Actually, there are many other questions, Prof.
Happy to answer them if you want to send them to me.
Yes, Prof. We will do that. Thank you very much, and I hope that you will be free again for our invitation. Please visit us in Semarang, in Central Java. All right. Thank you very much,
good
Prof.
luck with your research. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Okay, Prof. Can we take your picture, please?
Oh.
All right. Okay, I'm just going to take a screenshot out of this. Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Please, the first screen.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Prof.
Bye, Prof.
Oke, Bapak Ibu, terima kasih banyak semuanya. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I hope to see you all again in our next accounting forum. And thank you very much, Prof. Faisal, for arranging, for taking all the troubles to make this event happen. Pak Surya, thank you, Bapak Ibu semuanya, Bapak Ibu dosen, Bapak Ibu, salam sehat. Saya pamit, J. Pak Faisal, silakan.
Oke, terima kasih Bapak Ibu semuanya atas partisipasinya. Nanti tanggal 31 kita masih ada kuliah umum lagi. Nanti kita akan share lagi. Mudah-mudahan berkenan untuk hadir ya.
Insya Allah, insya Allah.
Bro.
Nah, insya Allah.
Terima kasih Pak, terima kasih Bu.
Terima kasih Pak R. Tambang.
Terima kasih Bro.
Pak R. Tambang ada toh? Pak R. Tambang kok.
Terima kasih.
Pak R. Tambang kok nggak tanya tadi.
Terima kasih tadi semuanya. Ada trouble tadi Pak R. Tambang mau directly tapi nggak bisa, masih terkunci tadi.
Itu hampir saudara kembar saya ini.
Katanya idola Pak R. Tambang kok.
Baik Pak, terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terima kasih.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Saya pamit ya, Pak R. Tambang. Salam untuk teman-teman Pak R. Tambang.
Mana Pak?
Saya pamit Bapak Ibu.
Udah pergi.
Saya pergi. Prof. Anis, saya duluan ya, Prof. Faisal.
Oke, makasih Pak Fuad.
Makasih. Ya.
Prof. Anis, apa sih ini ketawain?
Hah? Lihat kau itu loh, tiba-tiba ngomong Jambi kau. Banyak orang bingung tadi.
Mana tahu-tahu aku.